What's going on YouTube? This is SG1 Sports and you're watching our college football channel. We're going to take a very early look at the Georgia Bulldogs schedule for 2024 and give you a very early projected record. This is based off of how tough the schedule is and just how good each team is expected to be this upcoming season based off of how they finished last year and, kind of quickly looking at what they will return. And so we're going to give you this. Again, this is not our official prediction, just a projection. We do this every single year. Before we get into the upcoming schedule, let's look back at the 2023 schedule. So here's the schedule for Georgia in 2023. And, they had a really easy non-conference schedule, of course. I believe it was Oklahoma they were supposed to play, and that game got canceled because of them coming to the SEC or whatever. So you look at UT Martin, Ball State, UAB, and then Georgia Tech, which turned out to be not a close game, but a somewhat competitive game. And then you look at who they played out of the West this past season. They did play Ole Miss, who turned out to be, one of the better teams in that division. Finished second in the West, and then Auburn, but then didn't play LSU, didn't play Alabama. So it was just a really easy schedule for them. 2024, a little bit of a different story. Here is that schedule. Before we go game by game, let's break it down, starting with the non-conference schedule. So they're going to play Clemson in Atlanta, Tennessee Tech, UMass, and Georgia Tech. So a much tougher non-conference schedule here with Clemson, of course. Georgia Tech is a program on the rise. The good news is you get that game at home. But yeah, you got two easy wins in there as well, Tennessee Tech and UMass. So you look at the home schedule, and again, you've got those non-conference games. And they have Auburn, Mississippi State, and Tennessee. Really, the problem with Georgia's schedule this year is that they have to play 6 games away from home, and you look at their home games, these are all games that you would figure that they'd have a good shot at winning on the road. You'd like to have Texas at home, you'd like to have Alabama at home, not necessarily Mississippi State. Now Auburn and Tennessee, those are tough places to play, but still you like your chances better on the road in those games than against maybe Texas and Alabama. So they should win their home games. You look at these 6 home games, and it would be a pretty big surprise if they lost any of them. But it's the road schedule that I think could potentially trip up the Bulldogs this year. And here it is, and I'm putting the neutral site games on here as well. So Clemson and Florida, both of those games, neutral site, not true road games. But Kentucky on the road. Then you have Alabama on the road, Tennessee on the road, or Texas on the road, and Ole Miss on the road. So again, Texas and Alabama, you really would like to maybe have one of those games at home. That's pretty tough the way the schedule wound up for them with those 2 games both being on the road. Ole Miss figures to be good again this year, and Kentucky, we'll see. But overall, you've got 6 challenging games away from home for Georgia this year. It is a much different schedule than last season. So they start with Clemson in Atlanta, open up the season with that game. Then they'll have Tennessee Tech on September the 7th. That'll be a home game, like I said. Then Kentucky on the 14th on the road. Georgia should be, a better team than Kentucky. We'll see how that plays out. Alabama on the road. They get a bye week before playing the Crimson Tide. So that's the good news here. Again, you do get a bye week before that Alabama game. But they do play them on the road. So back-to-back road games. But they do have a bye week in between, but still. Auburn after that at home on the 5th. Then they get Mississippi State on the 12th. Back-to-back home games, and then Texas on the 19th. So that's a pretty tough stretch there from Alabama to Texas with Auburn and Mississippi State in the middle. But good news is you get those games at home. Alabama and Texas probably going to be the 2 toughest games for Georgia this year, especially, again, the fact that those games are on the road. And then they get Florida on the 2nd of November, but they get a bye week before Florida, which I think they pretty much always do. If I'm Georgia, though, I'd rather flip those games around. I'd rather have the bye week before playing Texas. Florida's a rivalry. Of course, it's not going to be an easy win for them, but Georgia should be a better team than Florida again this year. And so that's kind of tough there. You look at Ole Miss after a rivalry game against Florida, going on the road to face Ole Miss on November the 9th. That might be the 3rd toughest game on this schedule. Then they play Tennessee on the 16th, UMass on the 23rd, and finish things out with Georgia Tech at home. It's just a really tough road schedule. That's really what it boils down to here, with Alabama, Texas, and Ole Miss, arguably the 3 toughest opponents that Georgia will play, all being on the road, and that makes for a pretty tough schedule in 2024. So here were the projections from 2023. You see Georgia, of course, 12-0 in the regular season. Our projection had them at 12-0. My prediction was 12-0. Athlon had them at 12-0. And the over-under was at 11.5. So expectations were obviously very high for Georgia this past season. And you could make the argument that they actually were the best team in college football. Really would have loved to have seen Georgia and Michigan in the national championship just to see. But they had the one bad game against Alabama. They weren't 100% healthy, lost that game, and it cost them a shot at a national championship. That won't happen again with a 12-team playoff, but let's get into this projection here. Again, this is the schedule. This is the scale that we use. If it's less than 20 or over 80, it'll be in the red or the green. Those games are counted as wins or losses. 20 to 29%, 71 to 80%, those are games where I think the spread is going to be double digits. Going to be 10 to 17 points, kind of in that range. 30 to 39, 61 to 70. Those are games where I think the spread will be a touchdown, 6, 7, 8, 9 points in that range. And then the white games in white, 40 to 60%. These are your 50-50 games where I think the spread will be less than a touchdown, and really games that can go either way. So let's just jump right in, and we do have a tier system that I use for this. It's a formula. This is not a prediction. Keep that in mind. This is not a prediction. It's just a formula. The formula that we used last year did put Georgia, though, at 12-0. A much tougher schedule this year, but they do have some pretty easy games in here. Tennessee Tech, Auburn, Mississippi State, UMass. Those are 4 games that they should win, and they should be considerable favorites, I think, in all 4 of those games. You look at the Auburn game, that one's kind of tricky because I think that team has a chance to be a lot better this year. And if depending on how much better they are, that could possibly be a game in the blue or even the purple, depending on that. But again, we're leaning more towards how the teams were last year, and I realize that Auburn played them tough last year, but that game was at Jordan-Hare. This time it'll be in Athens. It's a totally different story. So that's not a guaranteed win, but that one's closer to 80%, whereas Tennessee Tech's like 100%, UMass like 100%. Mississippi State's probably closer to 90%. But all these games will be counted as wins here for the projection. So 4 fairly easy games. Again, we'll see about Auburn, how good they are. And that's why this is not a prediction, because by the time we get to predictions, I might feel a lot better about Auburn. Maybe I think that game will be tougher for Georgia. But right now at home, I think that's a pretty easy win. So let's go to the games in blue. Florida and Jacksonville. Florida seems to be near the bottom of the SEC. It's a neutral site game. No real reason to expect Georgia not to be a 2-touchdown favorite in this one. Georgia Tech as well. It's at home. I know Georgia Tech played them pretty tough last year, but playing at home, I think they will be favored by a couple of touchdowns in this game as well. So 2 rivalry games there where I expect Georgia to be favored, but not guaranteed wins. And then we'll go to the games in the purple here. Clemson, Kentucky, and Tennessee. These are all games where I think Georgia will be favored by about a touchdown. Clemson and Atlanta going to be interesting. I really don't know what to expect right now. That game is so far away. Clemson's going to be a talented team, but I just don't think they're quite on Georgia's level. And again, I do think they'll be favored by about a touchdown in that one. Kentucky, because it's on the road, that's why it wound up in the purple. Again, just with the formula that we use. If I actually had to guess a spread there, I would probably go over a touchdown, probably more like 10 to 13. But again, that's just kind of a rough way of doing this. I do have an actual tier system and a formula that I use. Tennessee also at home. This is, so if you're wondering, like, Georgia's a tier 1 team, Tennessee's a tier 2 team, and the game being at home, that's enough to put Georgia as a pretty good favorite in this one. So Clemson, Kentucky, and Tennessee, all games that could be tough, but Georgia clearly going to be favored in all 3 games. And then you've got Alabama, Texas, and Ole Miss, all 50-50 games, and the projection, when you average it all out, comes out to 9-3. So 9-3, the projected record. No, that does not mean that they're going to lose to Alabama, Texas, and Ole Miss. That's not how this works. If you plug in the numbers, they would split those games because they're 50-50 games. But when you have games where you're a 60 to 70% favorite or whatever, Clemson, Kentucky, Tennessee, odds would say you're probably only going to win one of those games, or 2 of those games, I should say, 2 of those 3 games. So if you lose one of those, you lose a couple 50-50 games, or even get upset by Florida or Georgia Tech, you can see how you could get to 9-3. But me personally, I think this Georgia team is probably going to do better than 9-3. Again, I'm not going to give away an official prediction, but I will probably have them higher than 9-3. But it is tricky with Alabama, Texas, and Ole Miss all on the road, and these are all considered tier 1 teams. So That's a really tough schedule just with those 3 games, and not a lot of gimme games. Again, we've got Auburn here in the green. That might not be a game that Georgia's favored by 17, 18 points by the time we get there. So this is a really tough schedule with Clemson in the non-conference, a Georgia Tech team that's getting better. And you can see because of this schedule, that's why this Georgia team projected to go just 9-3. Do you agree? Do you disagree with this early projection? Feels like Georgia might be the best team in the country. It's hard to imagine the best team in the country losing 3 games, but again, it is a very tough schedule. So give me your thoughts down in the comments below.